Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another interview in the Intern interview series. Today, I am here with Dr. Caitlin Gottwald, and she is a recent graduate from the American University of the Caribbean, and she has recently matched into and started her intern year in anesthesia at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. So, without further ado, we'll just jump right into questions. How did you wind up deciding to go to a Caribbean school in the first place?
So first of all, hi everyone. So my path to Caribbean school was a little bit unusual, I guess. So in undergrad, typically what people take the MCAT during their junior year in anticipation to apply for the cycle for med school, which is actually like a year and a half in advance. I was going through a lot of like family dynamic struggles that just did not allow me to focus my attention on MCAT studying my junior year. So I actually took it my senior year and just knew that I was going to have to take a gap year, which was okay. So I took the MCAT. I did like 50th percentile on the MCAT. It was just very average. My grades were pretty average. I played college volleyball, so I had like other priorities other than getting straight A's, and I would not trade that experience for the world still to this day. So I ended up getting a job as a medical assistant during my gap year at a specialty vestibular clinic. And the medical director there was an AUC grad. So he was like one of the very early AUC classes. So I think he's in his like late 60s. So he did this Caribbean IMG stuff way before any of us were ever even alive. But he was like, saw me studying during lunch for the MCAT to retake it. So I was like, well, I have to just, retake and do better for applications. I didn't even bother applying to med schools with my like current MCAT score. And he was like, well, why don't you just apply to AUC, see if you get in, like, what's the harm? Like you'd be able to start right away. Why not? So I actually like applied in January of 2016, got accepted in February 2016, and then moved to the island in April 2016. So it was very fast. I was just like, I'm just gonna go full throttle for that. Most of my decision came from not wanting to wait a whole another year and a half for the next application cycle and retake the MCAT. And for most applicants, it takes like 2 or 3 years worth of applying to get in. And I was just like, by the time I spend time taking more time off to apply for US school, I could be done with med school from a Caribbean school by then. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go for it. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm so excited to hear too that you were an athlete in college as well. I ran track and field in college also, so I think that's a really cool experience that we share. And as you said, I think maybe that's part of the reason, my grades weren't so great. I didn't do so well on the MCAT. Maybe I didn't have the best foundation, but it's still an experience I wouldn't trade for the world. And I think that you can probably empathize when I say that it makes me who I am today. And I definitely wouldn't have gotten to where I am without the life lessons that I learned through my sports. So
very, very much so. And I was very shocked to find like when I went to AUC, some of my friends like in my closest like circle, like 2 were college baseball players, one was a college cross country runner. So there's actually kind of like a theme. I found way more athletes in college in there. And I was just like, yeah, man, I was like doing like 6 hours of labs on Tuesdays and Thursdays and then going to practice at night still. Like it was, and then playing games, like practicing like 25, 30 hours a week on top of school is insane. And
I feel the same way. It's like wanting to become a medical student and also being a college athlete are 2 very demanding tasks, and trying to do both of them together is definitely difficult. But it's funny you say that, because when I got to SGU also, the first 2 people I met on the beach, one happened to be a college lax player and one happened to be a college gymnast. It's like we just find each other.
I think so.
It's so interesting. So the next question, in terms of anesthesia, I feel like anesthesia is not something we're given a whole lot of experience in medical school, especially during our clinical clerkships. Like we don't even have a core in anesthesia. So can you just talk a little bit about how you became interested in it in the first place?
For sure. I was kind of like shocked by the fact that I ended up really being interested in anesthesia and liking it. Like during basic sciences, all you learn as far as anesthesia is maybe some basic pharm. And from that, it's like halothane hepatitis, and that's
Yeah.
it. Like, I don't really learn anything else. So during my general surgery rotation, which was my third rotation of third year, I just like caught myself peeking over the curtain all the time, just kind of being like, what's going on over there? Like, very just drawn to it. I don't really know what it was, but and then during my surgery rotation, I would find anesthesiologists, like if I got done for some reason, if cases got canceled, or if I miraculously got done a little bit early with my attending on a surgery day, I would just try to find an anesthesiologist that was like welcoming, that would just let me shadow. And then we had a patient who I was on my gen surgery rotation also at this time. He had serious complications from a robotic prostatectomy. Like, the urologist punctured a bunch of holes in the bowel. He just like got septic and like tanked within a matter of a couple hours of coming out of surgery. So we took him back for an X-lap, but as they were prepping him, I watched the anesthesiologist. Like, this guy's pressure was like 60/40 at the time. Like, it was not good. And the anesthesiologist, I was like, hey, like, do you mind if I watch you like prep this patient? He's like, yeah, usually use an ultrasound for a central line, but I'm gonna do this blind because I don't have time. And he just like whipped out a central line and like started the pressors and just, like, started the fluids. I was like, this is it. Like, this is cool.
That is pretty awesome. That's intense.
And I think through rotations, I find commonly people are either OR people or they're not OR people.
I agree.
And I am an OR person. So that kind of like limited what kind of specialties that I was interested in. Because I just really, really like being in the OR. It's kind of like its own different world for people who have experienced it. And for people who haven't, you'll find it's just like time passes very weirdly in the OR. I don't know how to describe it, but when you're in it, you'll know what I mean. So I am very much an OR person. So ended up going with anesthesia. I entertained gen surge a bit, but honestly, quality of life in residency and as an attending is so much better in anesthesia. And I have other priorities that I want to incorporate in my life other than just being a doctor. So
yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's something, prior to med school, I was like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor. I won't have time for anything else. And that's all I want to do. And like, as the years go by and as you spend, all of your time doing nothing but medicine, it's like you want less of it, I guess, in the future. And I think I agree with that. I think figuring out your lifestyle and what you want your quality of life to look like in the future is something really to take into consideration. And it's even hard to, when you're a medical student, you don't think those things are going to matter that much. And then you either wind up starting residency and you're just like, yeah, I got to reapply for something else. This just isn't it. So better to figure that out sooner, but I know it's hard. It's really hard, but.
Exactly. And I feel like we all go in with such optimism, and we're all just kind of like, yes, medicine. And it's true, because most of us have wanted to do this for forever. And like,
Exactly.
We're kids and it's finally here. And then, man, you get through like first and second year, and then you take step, and it's just kind of like more and more, you just see like, you know what, going to the gym and cooking my own meals and spending time with people that I like is just as important as being a doctor to me. So I was like, I can't work 70 hours a week for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's true.
I can't do it. So
no, I agree with you. I'm in a very similar boat. Very similar boat.
So, and there are people that totally love it and are in it. And you'll find a lot of like people who are in surgery are just like, they are in it, and that's awesome for them. But I was just not the same.
It's one of those things where you know when like if you belong there and you want that to be your life, you will know it from the minute you start doing it. Exactly. You'll just be able to tell. Exactly. So after you said, it sounds like you got a lot of your anesthesia exposure during your surgery core, which makes sense. After you decided you were interested in anesthesia, did you at any point take any further opportunities during your surgery rotation to kind of like meet with the anesthesiologist a little bit more, to like learn a little bit more?
I would say not necessarily anything more than shadowing at the point during my gen surgery rotation, because also where I was at a small community hospital, we didn't have surgery residents at all. So as a third year, I was like first assist on everything, which was the coolest opportunity. Like, I was like elbows deep in X-laps and like crazy stuff as a third year, which was an awesome opportunity, but I didn't really solidify. I guess this was just kind of like a risk taking, but I didn't really solidify my like true this is it love for anesthesia until my electives, which was the summer before fourth year. So I just had this like feeling in the back of my mind. I was like, I think this is it. Like, I think this is it. And then once I got to do the electives, I was like, yeah, like this is still exactly what I want to do. So there was a few months of like kind of uncertainty and questioning it, but
Okay. And did you have, it sounds like you gained most of your interest in medical school. When you went into medical school, did you have any idea you wanted to do anesthesia or not at all?
No clue at all. So I actually think I went into med school initially wanting to do derm, and I think skin is also just super cool.
It is very cool.
Yeah, and I used to watch lots of YouTube videos on like Mohs reconstructive surgery when they like remove cancers and like the flaps and stuff, and it's like it's an art. If you watch Mohs surgery, it's an art, like how they hide the suture lines and stuff like within the smile lines. It's like kind of like a little bit of plastics, which was really cool. But then also you got to do like clinical derm work. And then I went to a Caribbean school and they were like, we've never had anybody in the history of our school match into derm. So I was like, I better find something else. So, and then I ended up being in the OR. I was like, I like this way more anyway. So
yeah, thankfully you did find something else that you were interested in, which is important to be open-minded as well, because I think a lot of people go into medical school thinking they're going to do something and they come out doing something completely different.
Totally different.
So being open-minded is definitely important. For anesthesia, are there fellowships like available for?
Yeah, lots of fellowships actually, which is people are usually not aware of. So you can practice as a general anesthesiologist for a lot of positions. There are fellowships in ICU, so that's one way either through internal medicine or anesthesia that you can get critical care. We have neuroanesthesia, obstetrical anesthesia, regional, pediatric, cardiothoracic, and I think there might be one more. I think there's 7 total, but that's most of them.
Okay. Are you interested in doing any of these or not so much?
I'm kind of in between cardiothoracic and regional. Regional is really cool because you can like provide long-term anesthetic with just big nerve blocks and stuff, which is kind of fighting the opioid crisis, I guess, kind of at the same time. And cardiothoracic is cool because I saw my first open heart surgery on my cardiothoracic anesthesia week during my elective, and it is the coolest thing. Like my surgery elective, I didn't get to see, or sorry, my surgery core, I didn't get to see any open heart surgeries. And they like cracked the chest and they opened it, and I like looked over the curtain and I saw like a full beating heart in the chest. I was like, this is so cool. And then in cardiothoracic, you also get certified. Most people get certified in TEE. So you do like TEEs during open heart surgery.
Okay.
You just like assess volume status and function. So super complex. I kind of haven't like made a full decision, but I'm kind of back and forth between those two.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting you say that too, because I did a 2-week cardiothoracic surgery elective during 4th year. It was like one of the last things I did before we got kicked out for coronavirus. And I even said to the students who were rotating with me, I was like, I think that the anesthesiologist is just as active as the surgeons in cardiothoracic cases. They're constantly doing something.
Very much so. Until they have the heart and it's on bypass, they're like constantly doing stuff.
Yeah, it was really crazy. Super cool though, super cool. So in terms of, I know you said that you didn't really gain interest in anesthesia until you were actually a clinical student, but in terms of matching into anesthesia, which is a relatively competitive specialty, what do you feel like helped set you up for success that you did in your basic science years?
So for basic science, I took my studies extremely seriously. Some people can like get by with just still kind of like cramming college style studying. I know people that could, and I could not. So I studied and I became a human machine for step 1, honestly. Like I was a well-oiled machine for step 1. So I knew that getting a good step 1 score was going to be ultimately what could get my foot in the door as an IMG.
Right.
And it's really unfortunate that they're going to pass fail for IMGs. Like I'm like, man, that's one very easy way for us to level the playing field, and it's being taken away. So, I mean, I think the emphasis will still go to CK anyways, but
I do as well.
yeah, but regardless, like really focusing on getting a good step one score was what I truly did. And it's hard because as far as like being a good anesthesia applicant, you don't learn anything about anesthesia and basic sciences.
Yeah, that's true.
So you just do your best overall to be a good student and set yourself up with a good score.
No, I think that's a really excellent answer, because I think a lot of times a lot of M1s or M2s will reach out to me and be like, what can I be doing to enhance my application right now? And I'm just like, learning medicine is the most important thing you could be doing right now to set yourself up for success. You need to learn medicine, because even when step one goes to pass fail, you still need to do well on CK. And the best way to set yourself up for success on that is to have a good step one score, so that you're not trying to compensate for everything on step two, which is going to now be your only chance instead of your second chance.
Exactly.
So I'm very glad that you brought that up, because I think a lot of people can benefit from hearing that for sure. And then, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, there's definitely like orgs and stuff you can get involved in basic sciences. Like I was AMSA president for a semester. I found like 2 orgs that actually were interesting to me, and I just became involved. I applied for positions. That was like basically the only like resume padding that I did in basic sciences, other than try to get a good score. So
yeah, I agree. And I think when you get to clinical years, I mean, schedules are busy. They're busy in a very different way. But at least I think there's a little bit more time for enhancing your application in terms of volunteer. And it can be a little bit easier to get volunteer experiences, I think, when you're back in the States than when you're on the island, just because communication is much easier here, honestly, than it is on the island. People don't tend to answer their phones often, and they definitely don't return your phone. So
it's on island time, so they'll be like, I'll get back to you in a month about this.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, well, actually, I'm going home for summer break in a month, but thanks for reaching back out to me.
I know.
But similar question for clinical years. What do you feel like you did during clinical years that helped set you up for success in match?
Honestly, like I can't stress this enough, but like studying during rotations is crucial. Like just getting past the shelf, okay, great, that's fine. But like if you take the opportunity and take the time to learn each rotation material well, that makes studying for CK so much easier and sets you up for a much better score. I'm just like, rotations, people be like, oh, I have a chill month, and then they're like partying every weekend. I'm like, okay, that's fine, but like getting a 60 on the shelf doesn't make things any easier for you down the road. So, you know, just put in the time. And as a third year and third year especially, like, and even now an intern year, I guess, is like, look at everything, every rotation, even if you're not interested, as an opportunity to learn something. Something will come from each rotation that you will need to know, or will just help you learn other things. Like right now I'm in neonatal ICU for an intern year, and I'm like, sometimes I'm like, I don't know how to manage like 29-week preemies. I don't know, but you know, this is going to teach me something at the end of it all. So I think just honestly, scores, especially for IMGs, and overall, just like use it as an opportunity to learn. You're paying a lot of money for this opportunity to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I say this, I feel like every single time, and people who watch my stuff regularly know that I say this very often, but they're called cores for a reason, and it's because you need them, believe it or not. You need your cores. They're cores for a reason. So once you got to your 4th year elective for anesthesia, I'm assuming you needed to get anesthesia letters of recommendation in order to apply for anesthesia. What do you feel like you did to help you get a good anesthesia letter from your anesthesia elective?
For sure. So I actually had 2 of my 4 letters were from anesthesiologists. I think you need at least 1. And everyone's pretty aware that anesthesia is like A, not a core, B, not always easy to get. So I mean, I know someone that applied anesthesia who didn't have an elective until September, and like was just getting a letter kind of last minute and was like, this is what I want, but I couldn't get my hands on anything sooner. So first of all, setting yourself up and get an elective before ERAS opens. So I did my electives in August and September. I ended up getting 2 letters from my August rotation, so didn't need my September letter, but I was like, if I need one, like I can get one
Yeah.
from this as well. So first of all, setting yourself up with good timing. Second of all, if you go into the rotation and you very quickly will kind of find attendings who you vibe with and attendings who you don't really vibe with, and just to be a good, how try to say this, be helpful without being in the way to the people who you vibe with. So I found one anesthesiologist who on my first rotation, we vibed very well, and he was just like, okay, like, are you planning on applying? I was like, yeah. He's like, okay, like after a couple weeks, like we'll see how it goes, and then like let me know if we need a letter if it goes well. So he was just like, let's go put some tubes in, let's go drop some LMAs. Like he would just like call me to come do a bunch of stuff. It's basically like anything you could do to help, which as a student there isn't a whole lot, but staying out of the way yet be interested is really all the expectation is. Ask good questions, and try to know a little bit about the patient before you go into the surgery with them, because a lot of people will just kind of like, I see this from other students, like while I was on my electives, will just kind of like show up for the intubation and just be like, can I intubate? And the attending's like, you don't know anything about this person. Like, no, I'm not gonna let you intubate.
Yeah.
So that, and then for example, for one attending, she was running like 5 minutes late to a case. And this was like my 3rd week with her, and the patient was on the table. I like put all the EKG leads on, I put the blood pressure cuff on, had everything ready. I had the ET tube, the laryngoscope, everything was set up. So all she had to do was come in and intubate. And she was like shocked that she's like, oh, you have this all, it's all done, it's all ready. And I was like, yeah, like I did what I could. Like I knew you were running behind, so this is all I can do. She's like, you're gonna intubate this patient today. Like,
oh, that's fun.
yeah. So it was like, yeah, like that was like one time when it really paid off. Like, you know how to do the simple stuff, do the simple stuff.
Yeah.
So.
That's a great tip, because I think, like you said, it is, I think, a little difficult to kind of stand out in an anesthesia rotation because it's very hands-on, and if you're not trained to do it, it's a little hard for someone to want to trust you to do it. But I think, yeah, taking ownership of patients is a really great piece of advice, because it is. I mean, it was similar in like the surgery clerkship too. Like students would show up and be like, oh yeah, can I scrub in? They're like, well, how old is the patient? What are we doing the surgery for? And like, if you can't answer those basic questions, then no, you can't scrub in. Actually, it's like a very similar concept. So know your patients and do your own research, and people will help you out if you help them, I think is kind of the moral of the story. So moving on to the taboo topic of step scores. You don't have to answer a specific numerical answer, but just in terms of above, below, about the same as the average. It seems like the average step 1 score for anesthesia is in the low 230s, which is one of the higher step score averages across a lot of specialties. So just in terms of like how you compared to the average.
Yeah, so I was in the high 230s for my step 1, and then high 240s for CK.
Okay.
230s, high 240s. Yeah.
Okay, and you feel as though that helped you a lot in terms of obtaining interviews and matching ultimately.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Okay. And then anesthesia programs are 4 years long, correct? And you do a preliminary year in surgery, internal medicine, transitional, any of them?
Any of them. So this is like really, this is like a confusing topic until you start doing all of your research when you start prepping for ERAS. But basically there are a couple specialties like anesthesia, I think radiology, and I think derm as well, actually. Some of these programs require you to do an intern year. So that can be either a preliminary medicine, surgery, or transitional year. It doesn't matter. But those are all 1-year programs, and those applications like in ERAS will be separate from the anesthesia programs. So if you match into a prelim year, you will hopefully at the same time match into what's called an advanced anesthesia position. Advanced meaning you complete your intern year either in the same hospital but a different program, or an entirely different hospital, different program. So you could match prelim year in New York and match your anesthesia in Texas, like doesn't matter. There are also categorical programs, which seems to be the trend from everyone that is moving away from doing the separate years and moving into a categorical program, which is what I'm in Chicago, is all 4 years are in one hospital, but your intern year is still an included intern year. So like I'm doing like 3 months of ICU, 2 months of floors, 2 months of surgery, 1 month of ER, 2 weeks of NICU right now, 2 weeks of pulm. And then I think we have like a medical consult service, and a couple other things. So my intern year is still what you would get on any other prelim type of year, but it's just included with my program, and that's called categorical program. So everyone seems to be making the move towards that.
Okay. But currently, like at this time, there are still programs taking both routes.
Right.
So for those, did you apply to only categorical anesthesia, or did you also apply to advanced with prelims?
Yeah, I applied to advanced and prelims. So because of ERAS, and like if you apply to, the more specialties you apply to, the more you have to pay, right? Because it's divided by specialty. So I just decided like I'm going to do medicine prelim of any of these. Transitional year, especially for IMGs, is a little bit harder to get. I was told by a couple people at AUC, like, and also an anesthesiologist that was practicing, he was like, you know, TYs are usually for like the derms, the radiologies, like some of like the really high scoring US grads get a lot of those spots. So I was like, I'm not even gonna bother applying TY, so I'm just gonna do medicine prelim.
Okay.
So I applied to that, and then I applied to advanced programs and categorical programs. So I technically had 2 specialties, but like 3 different styles of programs.
So then if you applied to internal medicine prelim years for those advanced positions, did you also need a letter of recommendation from an internist?
So I kind of went back and forth about this. My other letters of recommendation for anesthesia were from 2 surgeons. So I had 2 anesthesia, 2 surgeons, and that wasn't intentional. That was just who I found that knew me the best by the end of my rotations. And so I didn't have any letters specifically for prelim because I was told by a couple different people from school. They were like, everybody who's entering a prelim, like they know that your goal is to move on from medicine or move on from surgery, right? Like,
right.
They don't need a letter or like a totally different personal statement explaining why they're passionate about doing 1 year of medicine when they know that your ultimate goal is to do anesthesia. So
yeah.
I didn't like use separate letters or a separate personal statement really, because everyone's aware that your goal is to move on from a prelim. Right. So. Okay.
Yeah. Cause it sounds like, I mean, at least for like my program, I know we have like 5 specific spots in internal medicine first year for anesthesia every single year.
Yeah. Some programs will do that. If they have an advanced program for anesthesia, sometimes they'll be able to work with other programs in the same hospital. Like, hey, like you can reserve 5 like first year IM spots or like 5 TY spots for our people. It basically turns it into like a categorical situation. Like you're doing offers at the same spot, but that's like coordinated entirely by just like the programs. It's fortunate for people that can do that, but it's not everywhere. So. Okay.
And in that case, you technically would still be applying to the advanced and the preliminary, just hoping to match at the same location.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, understood. Makes sense.
I know it's confusing. It was hard, like it was stressful when applying.
Yeah, it's. I don't know. So you match until you have 2 matches on match day, essentially. Yeah. It comes up as 2 separate.
So in ERAS, you still rank all your programs. So like I had a couple categorical, a couple advanced, and then underneath each advanced is like a secondary application. So it's like each advanced one has like a drop down, and it has your prelim options for like for you to rank your prelims underneath your advanced positions. So
if you liked, for example, someplace in Texas as an advanced program, it would show you the options for like literally everywhere that you interviewed at for prelim.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, actually. It's nice that they do that and they don't just make you rank them all separate.
Right. So you don't have to have 2, it's not 2 rank lists. It's like supplemental lists underneath the programs needed.
I never knew that. That's interesting. Learning stuff here. So in terms of, I know you mentioned you did an elective in anesthesia before applying for ERAS. Did you do any auditions? Did you consider this as an audition or not really?
I considered one that I did in Connecticut as an audition. The second elective I did, actually their residency program for anesthesia ended like 5 years ago. They don't have a program anymore. But the one I did in August was in Connecticut, and they had an affiliated hospital, so they had residents rotating through that hospital all the time who I got to work with. So 2 of my letters of recommendation came from their associated faculty, and I knew some of their residents. I was like a little bit peeved when they didn't even offer me like a courtesy interview. But I thought of that as kind of an elective, or sorry, an audition rotation. But coming from AUC, we only have like a list of hospitals that we can kind of work with. And for those who are not IMG, I don't know, does St. George have access to VSAS?
We don't. We have the same exact situation to you. It was like, oh, here is your like 15, 16 hospitals. You can go to any of them whenever you want during 4th year, as long as you schedule them yourself. But we don't have VSAS. If we wanted to do like out of network, we could, but we had to actually like contact the hospital like through email or like in person or on the phone or whatever. But yeah, no VSAS here.
So I just kind of like went through, and not all hospitals that we're affiliated with offered an anesthesia elective. Only like 3 of our like 16 did. So it didn't kind of narrow down my options. And
right.
It was like, you know, prime letter seeking application time that I was trying to get an elective. So I was like, man, going through all of these separate hospitals and like contacting the coordinator, and half the time the coordinator's like voice mailbox is like completely full, or they don't answer your emails. It's like, man, I'm just gonna like solidify and get what I can get. And
yeah,
it was tough. So
oh yeah, that is.
I didn't actually truly audition anywhere, but
okay. And so you match somewhere where you've never rotated before.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I think that seems to be most common, but I think it's like a common thought that everyone matches somewhere they've rotated before. And I'm like, no, that's not true at all. I think it's the opposite. Most people match somewhere where they've never been in their whole life. Yeah, exactly. And then they show up on the first day of intern year and have no idea where anything's at.
Yeah. We have 9 in my class, in my incoming intern class, and 2 of them rotated at the hospital. 1 only did in anesthesia, and 1 did in like a bunch of other stuff. So he's like our main connect about like, where is the locker room? Where is all those things? So yeah, only 2 of our 9 have ever rotated there. So
how big are anesthesia classes like usually? What's the average size?
I think like some of the really, really big ones are like 20. That's like a huge class.
I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, but most of the places I rotated was somewhere between like 5, or not rotated, I'm sorry, applied and interviewed was between like 5 and 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was still bigger than I thought. I thought like 5, 6 was considered big for anesthesia. I didn't know that it was that big. Wow. I guess there are a lot of surgeries that go on in hospitals though. So.
Right, if you have like a 15-room operating suite.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then plus like a GI suite, I'm sure you need anesthesiologist for that.
Endo suite.
Yeah. What else? Research. Everybody likes to ask about research. How important was research for obtaining an anesthesia residency in your opinion?
I honestly don't think it's that important. First of all, it's really hard to get an anesthesia elective, let alone find research to do during your 1-month elective. And like for our school, they don't allow us to do more than 2 electives in the same specialty.
Okay.
I couldn't do a 3rd anesthesia elective just because I wanted. So it was tough to try to even find opportunity. But I think if you're presented the opportunity to do research in any specialty while you're on your IM rotation, your surgery rotation, whatever, like you should take that up. Like it's going to help any application. But I don't think it's super necessary, and especially not incredibly necessary to have it in specifically in anesthesia, because it's like really hard to obtain at all. So
yeah, I agree. And I think just to like kind of go off of that, did you have any research experience on your application?
I had
in any field.
Yeah, I had one big project in undergrad that I put on my ERAS application, and it was about basically like marijuana-induced psychosis type of stuff in a college population, which is like kind of interesting for anesthesia, I guess, because we're always looking for like alternatives to opiates, and now with like legalization of marijuana and stuff like that. So my like a person I contacted, an anesthesiologist, was like, well, this is interesting. Like you could still put this on your app because I think it's like even semi-relevant.
Right.
But I didn't have any research in third or fourth year, to be honest. Like I was at a really small community hospital all of third year, and I bugged and bugged and bugged and bugged and tried to get something. And I think they were probably so annoyed at me, but everyone, I was like, I can't get my hands on anything.
Yeah.
So, but if you have the opportunity to do case reports or anything helps. So.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, since you did have some type of research on your application, of the interviews you went on, how many times were you asked about your research project?
One.
I love asking this question because the answer is always the same. And it just goes to show how everyone is so obsessed with doing research and nobody
cares. I think I had one other interview ask me, like, were you able to do any research? And I could tell this was someone who had not read my application very well. Based on the other questions they were asking me, I was like, you have all of this on paper in front of you. So I know they didn't really know my application. They were like, did you do any research? I was like, no, honestly, like I kept trying, and I was at a small hospital. I couldn't get my hands on anything. But then I would like follow up with like, definitely interested in getting my hands on something in residency though. Like would love to be part of a project, you know? Yeah. And, like spin it into a positive.
Of course. I think that, I know a lot of people, I love asking this question because I just want, it's the same answer every time. And I feel like whoever I'm interviewing always says, I had some type of research. It's usually always from undergrad. My research on my application, also from undergrad. I was also only asked about it one time on interviews, like, and it just seems to be a very common thing. It's just, unless you're applying for like derm, urology, plastics, you probably don't need it. If you're applying for those, you should probably think about getting some research. But I just think it's one of those things that if you have it, it will enhance your application. But if you don't have it, it's not going to hurt you.
Yeah, I agree. And
it just doesn't do anything.
I know. I always like felt like on interviews too, like I felt like I was the only one in the room that probably didn't have really any like good research, and like I felt like kind of insecure about it. But then after talking to people, they were like, "No, I didn't have anything either."
Yeah.
So
yeah, it seems to be the common theme. It's hard to get, and even like I don't know. It's like unless you're really passionate about it, and unless you're doing something that's like relatively groundbreaking, then people are just not that interested. But if you're passionate about it, then by all means do it. But if you're just doing it to do it, it's probably not even worth your time.
I know. I agree.
Honestly. In terms of how many places you applied, I think since you went to a Caribbean school like me, I'm just curious, how many places were suggested that you apply and how many did you actually apply to?
Yeah, so I think it's totally different for anesthesia because there's only like 200-ish programs in the country, which is very different from anything in primary care. You have like thousands to pick from, hundreds to pick from if not. So there's only like 200. Basically, I looked at those. I eliminated anything Ivy League. I was like, there's no sense in me even sending my money. And then I used Frida, which is like kind of a well-known thing. And I looked at programs that had like at least 5% IMGs. Like I used a little slider scale, the filter. And then there were also some programs you'll find when you're applying is that they're like, oh, like we accept IMGs or like we help with visas. And then you go look at their class and like all of their residents, none of them are IMGs. So anybody that I found that didn't have a single IMG on their like resident list, I did not apply there because it's like, yeah, like sure you like the application money, but you don't actually like us. So, so I like I just didn't even. I was like, I think for anesthesia specifically, all the programs in Oregon and Nebraska randomly, I don't remember why I remember those, but none of them had any IMGs at all, which eliminated like I think 5 or 6 programs at least.
Like right off the bat.
How I ended up like filtering through them, but I think overall I ended up applying to like 110 anesthesia programs, which our school recommended like I think somewhere between like 75 to 150 programs for that was like the like very generic recommendation for most people. So
Yeah, ours is like 100 to 150 or something like that. So very similar.
Yeah.
And did you apply for a secondary specialty or no?
So I ended up applying for internal medicine for the program I did my third year rotation at because it was very small, very, very tight knit. I felt like I probably could have matched there if I really needed to. Like, they were kind of like, like, we really like you. We'll rank you high enough that you would get here, but we know your ultimate goal is
Right.
anesthesia. We want you to be there, but we also don't want you to go unmatched either. And I was very fortunate to have such a tight knit like
Absolutely.
spot that kind of like helped. So I only applied to one other IM program.
Okay. So all anesthesia and one IM.
Yeah, and then the prelims, the IM
Right,
prelims
right.
as well. Mm-hmm.
Which kind of are coupled with anesthesia, more or less.
Right.
If you could go back and do this whole thing over again, I know especially as Caribbean students, I feel like we're given so much advice, both great, bad, somewhere in the middle, and we kind of just have to filter out and use what we think is applicable to us because we don't really have any other resources.
Right.
If you could go back and do it all over again, is there anything you'd change, or are you very happy with the way, you applied, the way you interviewed, the things you did, the ways you studied, things like that?
Man, like, first of all, I would not have beat myself up so much about having average basic science grades. I studied really hard. I felt like a lot of, at least the tests at our school, were professor written. They were not like standardized exams, except most of the finals were. But I felt like a lot of times it was kind of like, can you play the test taking game more than do you know the material? Because
Right.
I felt like I really honed in on material, and then I'd get to the test and I'm like, I'm not like, I know the stuff, but your questions are so like obscure.
Yeah.
And then I did average grades and then did like 75th percentile on the MCAT for like my time frame. So, or MCAT, step one, I mean, I did really well on step one because I'm like, I know this stuff. I just can't take these like weird tests.
Yeah.
Well, and then ultimately, like, your basic science grades don't have like any factor into your interview opportunities or your application unless you're like an honors dean's list. Like, okay, great, that looks awesome. But if you're not, like, if you pass everything, you don't have any like fails. Even if you have fails, I know people who have failed classes and still match. So it happens. So I wish I wouldn't have spent so much time like beating myself up over that. And then, so like, side note, I went through Hurricane Irma in September 2017, and I was on the island for that.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so they like relocated us to Manchester. So I was in England for like 9 months after I lost like all of my stuff in the hurricane.
Yeah, that's
And I was
brutal.
evacuated like day 8 or day 9 that we were like stranded there. That was a mess. But ultimately, like, you get through it. So I wouldn't change anything I did because I worked hard and like worked through a lot of obstacles when it came to that kind of stuff. So not too much else I would change.
It's good to
Just
hear.
keep
And it
focused.
sounds like you're more or less where you'd like to be, or at
Yeah.
least for now.
Yeah,
You know.
it's crazy. I think someone asked me the question in my interviews, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years, which is such a cliche interview question. But I'm like, obviously,
It's common.
hopefully I'm a doctor by that time. Like, I'm here in this interview, right? Like, what do you want from me? But like, thinking about, starting med school, and like when I was 23, I guess, 22, 23, I think. And thinking about at that time where I wanted to see myself in 5 years, and this is exactly where I want it to be. So you'll face a lot of challenges in the process, but if you persevere, like, the light is at the end of the tunnel, whether or not it feels like it most days.
Yeah, that is inspiring. I think a lot of people need to hear that because, I mean, it's not that long ago that we were in everybody who's watching this, their shoes. So I think that goes a long way. And that was very well said, very well spoken, if I must say. Before we finish up, just kind of touching a little bit on interviews. What do you feel like your most commonly asked interview question was?
Easily for anesthesia is why anesthesia, because everyone's well aware that you don't get much exposure. It's kind of just like anesthesia is like not like anything else, you know, like in family medicine, you get some peds and some internal, and then in OB, you get a little bit of peds because like, you know, there's like neonatal stuff. But anesthesia is just like, I don't know, it doesn't really intermix with a lot. So everyone's kind of like, why do you want to do this? And your answer should never be like, I like the OR. Like, it should be a little bit more. So like, first of all, the really cool thing about anesthesia is you can manipulate physiology with pharmacology, right? We give a drug, something happens. We change a position, something happens. That's not pharmacology, but we do something and there's a physiologic response. So that part is really cool. And like, you get to keep people alive during surgery with just like very like minuscule manipulations. It's like an art at the end of it when you get good at it. So you have to have like good answers prepared for anesthesia because people know that like your exposure is kind of minimal overall. So.
And just kind of going off that as well, since like you said, the exposure is not excellent, usually pretty minimal. What do you think that program directors are specifically looking for in their applicants?
So for anesthesia, this is, I mean, applicable to any place, but this was actually one of my follow-up questions for a lot of people when they say, do you have any questions? And for interview tips, you should always have at least a question.
True.
Bad if you don't. So I always said, like, what are you guys looking for an applicant? Like, what is your ideal applicant? And it would be like someone who's willing to work hard, but also be a team player. And that's like kind of important in anesthesia in particular, because you sometimes have to work in conjunction with surgeons who are not always nice, which there are not always nice doctors and everything, but surgeons can be pretty particular about what they want to happen in the OR. And so you have to really work dynamically with them. And then there's also like CRNAs and nurses in the PACU, and like you have to be willing to take a team role, especially. That was their biggest request from an applicant, I would say.
That is interesting. That is actually a really great question too to ask as a follow-up for the question of what questions do you have for me? Because I feel like it does give you some insight, because I think even after match, like a lot of people tend to wonder like, oh, I wonder why, like, how did I wind up here? Like, why did they want me? Like, why'd they invite me for the interview? And I mean, that's basically just directly asking them in the most professional way you possibly could. So exactly. I think that is excellent to hear some insight on that. That's great advice.
That was always my question, for sure.
It's a good question.
Because then there was one program in particular, like I went on the tours with a couple residents, and the residents looked like zombies. Like they were like so tired. And this program's like ICU call schedule was like, even in their non-ICU months, they were taking call like 4 times a month on ICU or something crazy. It was like ridiculous, and they're all exhausted. And I asked that question, like, what is your ideal applicant like qualities? And they were just like, someone who works hard, someone who doesn't complain. And I was like, okay. A little bit hostile of an answer. And I was like, you know, like it gives you some insight into their culture as well.
Yeah, I agree.
That question. So
I agree. Because if you're like very hardcore and don't care if you sleep, then like, great, that's the place for you. But I'm trying to get at least 6 hours when I can.
Exactly.
So I think that's pretty much all the questions that I have for you. Do you have anything else that you want to share, either in terms of advice or preparing for the application or interviews, or literally anything that you can think of?
From an IMG perspective, I guess, like, it's a little bit of an uphill battle depending on what part of your IMG journey you're in. Like if you're very starting out, or maybe you're, you know, in 4th year or whatever it is, it's a little bit of an uphill battle. But I encourage you guys to stay encouraged and stay positive, and remember that there was so many people that have done this before you, because whether you might rotate with US students who, you know, like maybe you feel insecure around, or maybe they make you feel insecure, or, you know, maybe they throw shade or something, but like remember that you're going to get to the same place regardless of where you went to school. Yeah, we probably paid a little bit more money. Yeah, it was probably a little bit more stressful, but you're going to get to the same place. And ultimately, if you want it bad enough, you'll make it happen. So that's my main advice.
I agree. And that is excellent advice and an excellent note to end on. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know that you had a very busy call yesterday, and I know that as a fellow current intern, life is very hectic right now. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat today about anesthesia. I feel like I learned a lot. So I know that this video is going to help a lot of people, especially because, like we were talking about, anesthesia is not something you get a ton of exposure to until it sort of feels like it's too late. Right. So I think this will go a long way in terms of helping people whose shoes we were in not too long ago.
Yeah, so, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you guys have any anesthesia specific questions, AUC, IMG specific questions, like you can find me on Instagram. I do have some people that DM me and ask questions. I am an intern. I am taking like 28-hour call right now. So I'll answer, I promise. Just next week, my schedule eases up a little bit, but right now it's a little crazy. So, but yeah, let me know if you guys have any other questions. Happy to help.